The other night before the WNBA game, as the national anthem was being sung, the only player to stand with their hand over their heart the entire time was Sophie Cunningham.
Sophie Cunningham stood there as the national anthem played, and suddenly, she appeared to be the only player on the floor listening. Then came an even stranger twist. The New York Liberty reportedly did not even come out, leaving fans wondering what exactly was happening behind the scenes. Was this a silent protest, a scheduling decision, or something nobody expected? And why was Sophie the one standing alone?
Only one WNBA player respected the national anthem. Can you guess who? Sophie Cunningham was the only player on her team standing with her hand over her heart during the national anthem. So Sophie was the only one saluting the flag.
The strangest thing about Sophie Cunningham's latest night was that the controversy started before basketball even began. There was no crossover, no hard foul, no technical foul, and no dramatic argument with a referee. Instead, there was simply the national anthem, a basketball court, and one player standing with her hand over her heart, while the entire moment around her became impossible to ignore.
Has never changed, except in the WNBA. In the League of Inclusion, the national anthem is a little bit different. Sunday afternoon in Atlanta, the Indiana Clarks were on the floor to honor America. I know the Atlanta Dreamers were on the floor at one point before the game because they were out there bowing to Stacey Abrams like she was some kind of queen. But
Sophie Cunningham had already become one of the most talked about players in the WNBA, and not because she had suddenly transformed into a 40-point-per-game scoring machine. Her recent comments about transgender participation in women's sports had placed her at the center of a national debate, and once that happened, every arena she entered seemed to come with a new layer of tension.
First of all, I want to say she's an American hero.
Yes.
Everywhere she goes, I see now a lot of people are coming out and actually defending her. But obviously, if you're standing up for something that you believe in, you're going to get hate all the time. But I think she's inspiring not only the players in WNBA, but girls from all over the world, not only in America, because I get so many messages and they're saying that from all over the world. Wow. They're saying, hey, if you ever see Sophie, can you please say hi to her?
And just when people thought that moment would remain an Atlanta storyline, the situation followed Sophie to New York. Before the Fever's game against the Liberty at Barclays Center, Cunningham again stood with her hand over her heart during the anthem.
Yes, the whole team did not show up for the national anthem. Never did they. Wow! And we're just now hearing about this? Wow! My goodness.
He was trying to tell certain fans, we don't want your business. Stay away.
Reports and commentary around the viral footage said Liberty players were not on the court for that pre-game moment, creating another striking visual contrast. Cunningham stood there while the attention around her grew louder, and then the crowd reaction made it clear that this was no longer just about basketball, because Sophie Cunningham was booed again. And that is where this story becomes much bigger than one player, one anthem, or even one game. This is what happens when sports, politics, identity, fandom, and social media all decide to enter the same arena at the same time. Suddenly, a player cannot simply walk onto the court and worry about whether her jumper is falling. Every movement is examined, every gesture becomes a headline. Every hand position becomes a national investigation conducted by people who have somehow acquired a doctorate in body language overnight. The WNBA has always contained players willing to speak about social issues, but the Cunningham controversy has introduced another level of polarization. Her comments about transgender athletes drew strong criticism from many fans and also attracted support from people who agreed with her position. By the time Indiana arrived in Brooklyn, the debate had become so intense that opposing demonstrations took place outside Barclays Center before the Fever played the Liberty. So when Sophie stepped onto that court, she was not simply entering another road game. She was entering a building where the basketball had almost become the background music to a much larger argument.
Teammates were still trying to figure out if the heart is above or below the belly button. The other team, the Atlanta Dream, skipped the anthem altogether because they couldn't figure out how to raise an arm without clotheslining Caitlin Clark.
The Atlanta Dream didn't even come onto the court.
The Liberty eventually defeated Indiana 109-102 in a game that carried serious importance for both teams, and New York used a balanced effort to protect its home court. Jonquil Jones posted 19 points and 10 rebounds, while Leonie Fibic scored 20 points in her return from a lengthy injury absence. The Fever made pushes, including a late surge that briefly tied the game, but the Liberty held their composure and closed the door. Yet, even with all of that basketball happening, Sophie Cunningham's reception remained one of the loudest talking points. The boos were becoming part of Sophie Cunningham's road game experience, but what happened in Atlanta made the situation even more complicated. By then, the reaction was no longer limited to one arena or one controversial moment, because Cunningham had started walking into different buildings with the same question following her. How would the crowd respond this time? Toronto had already given her a hostile reception, and Atlanta added another chapter when Cunningham stood during the national anthem, with her hand over her heart while the Dream were not on the court. Caitlin Clark was nearby, standing respectfully with her hands behind her back, but Cunningham's gesture immediately became the image that dominated the conversation. The interesting part was that the game itself had nothing to do with the anthem controversy once the basketball started.
This game really pissed me off, man. This game pissed me off. That last play, 2 plays that really made me angry was Boston just throwing it up there in the wind and just such a stupid shot. And then Caitlin Clark, come on, bro. You are a 3-point assassin. Why are you driving to the basket? If you're going to do an easy 2, just shoot the midi. Or I just didn't understand that shot. Was there a play drawn, or are they just making shit up on the...
Indiana and Atlanta eventually produced a dramatic overtime contest, with the Fever escaping with a 95-91 victory behind a huge performance from Clark, who finished with 26 points and 9 assists. There was enough drama on the court to fill an entire highlight package, yet somehow the pre-game anthem moment had already captured much of the audience's attention. That is what made Atlanta so important to this story, because the reaction to Cunningham was not happening in isolation. The WNBA has a long history of players using their platforms to express views on social issues, and teams have previously made decisions about how they participate in pre-game ceremonies. For some fans, the Dream remaining off the court was simply part of that broader tradition. For others, Cunningham's decision to stand with her hand over her heart represented a completely different statement. Either way, the contrast was impossible for cameras to ignore. Cunningham stood there while the anthem played, and the internet immediately transformed a few seconds of pre-game footage into another cultural battlefield. Some supporters praised her decision, while critics argued that the gesture could not be separated from the controversy surrounding her public comments. Meanwhile, people who simply wanted to watch basketball suddenly found themselves trying to decode hand placement before the opening tip. At that point, the WNBA had somehow turned the national anthem into a pre-game box score.
Those comments have generated plenty of reaction from both sides of the issue. During a recent game, Cunningham was reportedly met with boos from portions of the crowd. But on the court, she appeared unfazed because she's an athlete, that's why. It shouldn't matter what someone's yelling in the crowds, right? Smiling, continuing to play, and taking her shots despite the reaction from fans.
Caitlin Clark could not be bothered. And not only that, the Atlanta Dream, the team that Angel Reese plays for, they couldn't even be bothered to come out of the locker room. They stayed in there the whole time until the anthem was done. You know, sometimes I truly think that the women of the WNBA are intentionally going out of their way to do things to make people not like them, to make people not want to support their organization.
When Indiana faced the Liberty at Barclays Center, the atmosphere was already charged before the basketball began. Demonstrations took place outside the arena, supporters and critics of Cunningham gathered around the building, and the debate that had followed her across the country was now playing out in one of the biggest markets in the league. Then Cunningham stepped onto the court. Once again, the anthem became part of the conversation, and once again, her decision to stand with her hand over her heart drew attention. Reports surrounding the game also highlighted the Liberty's absence from the court during the anthem, creating another visual contrast that immediately circulated online. And then came the boos. This was important because Cunningham had already experienced that reactions elsewhere. The Liberty defeated the Fever 109-102, with New York getting major contributions from Jonquil Jones and Leonie Fibic. Fibic, returning from a lengthy absence, delivered an important performance, while New York repeatedly made life difficult for Indiana's offense. Caitlin Clark was once again at the center of the attention, but the game demonstrated why reducing everything to one player would miss the larger story. Indiana had problems beyond Clark, and New York had enough defensive pressure and offensive balance to hold off the Fever despite Indiana's late push.
At a high school game or a professional sporting event, the process is always the same. When it's time for the national anthem, everyone in the crowd gets off their ass and onto their feet. If you don't, some old-timer or military veteran, they will politely introduce their hand to the back of your head to get you off that soft ass. Both teams will be on the field or on the court. They will be standing opposite of each other while the national anthem is performed.
Still, Clark's involvement created another layer of conversation. The Fever star has reached a point where almost everything she does is analyzed. A missed shot becomes a discussion about her confidence. A difficult stretch becomes a question about her form. A substitution becomes a debate about coaching. Even her body language can become a topic of conversation before the game is finished. That brings us to Stephanie White. The Fever coach had already found herself in the middle of another controversy after sections of the Indiana crowd booed her following criticism surrounding the handling of the hard foul against Cunningham by Dejanai Carrington. The incident became a major talking point after Carrington was later assessed a flagrant 2 foul and ejected, with White eventually making clear that she considered the contact unacceptable after reviewing the play. Some Fever supporters felt White should have responded more forcefully from the beginning, and the frustration eventually spilled into the stands. That reaction did not sit well with the players. Sophie Cunningham was being booed in opposing arenas. Stephanie White was being booed by portions of her own fan base. Caitlin Clark was being scrutinized for virtually every decision.
Story. So if you guys don't know, there was another group of fans that was at a game involving Caitlin Clark and none other than Sophie Cunningham. So during this game, they was asked to cover up their shirts, because if not, they was going to have to leave. Now, with that being said, this is the statement that the Atlanta Dream gave out to the world to let them know about this situation.
And the Fever was still expected to function like a normal professional basketball team. What is clear, however, is that Clark remains under an extraordinary level of scrutiny, and that scrutiny extends to the people around her. Every coaching decision receives attention. Every teammate becomes part of a larger debate. Every opponent is evaluated through the lens of how they defend Clark. Even Cunningham, who has her own separate controversy, has become part of the broader conversation surrounding Indiana. That is why the boos directed toward Cunningham are so interesting. A boo does not necessarily tell you exactly why someone is unhappy. One fan might be reacting to Cunningham's public comments. Another might dislike her playing style. At this stage, predicting the basketball was probably easier than predicting social media. The issue traveled with her because it was attached to her identity as a public figure, not merely to one rivalry. Then Brooklyn demonstrated that the same controversy could become even more intense when the political disagreement was physically visible around the arena. That creates an unusual situation for Cunningham because she has to navigate 2 completely different realities at once. There is the basketball reality, where she is a professional athlete expected to execute plays and contribute to Indiana's success.
Throughout the season, this toxic turd has been doing what they do best, which is incessantly whining and complaining. One of the biggest complaints this season in the WNBA, now that players have increased their salaries from minimum wage to a livable wage, WNBA players are now complaining that their league is being politicized. Those dastardly outsiders, those bad faith actors, they are using our league to advance their political agenda. How come no one is talking about the pretend basketball in our league?
Then there is the cultural reality, where every pregame gesture can become evidence in an argument that has almost nothing to do with basketball. Those 2 realities collide every time she steps onto the floor. And perhaps that explains why the anthem footage attracted so much attention. Standing with a hand over your heart is normally an incredibly ordinary gesture. In this context, however, it became symbolic. The Liberty's absence from the court became symbolic. Clark standing with her hands behind her back became symbolic. The boos became symbolic. Even the timing of substitutions became something fans wanted to interpret. The basketball itself almost had to compete for screen time. White remains under enormous pressure as Indiana's coach. And Cunningham continues to walk into arenas knowing that the crowd reaction may be part of the night before the first whistle. That is perhaps the most unusual development of all. The controversy did not stop Cunningham from playing. If anything, it made people watch her more closely. Her supporters became louder. Her critics became louder. It simply means Cunningham has entered that rare category of athletes whose presence generates conversation before performance has even begun.
They wake up every day and think, how can I possibly make our league more unlikable? How can I increase the possibility of us failing even more? Because everything these women are doing, except Sophie Cunningham, are what you do if you want people to stop supporting you. It's what you do if your goal is to give your fans the middle finger.
The next time she walks onto the court, people will once again be watching the scoreboard, the players, the coaches, and apparently the pregame ceremony with the attention normally reserved for a championship game. That is the strange reality surrounding the Fever right now. The players may be trying to play basketball, but the audience has turned the entire evening into a referendum on everything surrounding the game. And Sophie Cunningham has found herself directly in the middle of it. The bigger question is whether the attention eventually fades, or whether every road game becomes another test of how much Cunningham's presence can stir up a crowd. because basketball itself is only one part of the story now. Cunningham can make a three-pointer, and people will debate her. She can miss a shot, and people will debate her. The more people argue about Cunningham, the more attention she receives. The more attention she receives, the more cameras follow her. The more cameras follow her, the more every gesture becomes visible. And the more visible every gesture becomes, the more material there is for the next argument. It is a cycle that practically manufactures its own headlines. So when Sophie Cunningham walks into the next arena, the question will not simply be whether she can help Indiana win. People will be watching to see whether the crowd boos her, whether she stands during the anthem, whether the opposing team appears for the ceremony, and whether another seemingly ordinary pregame moment somehow becomes the biggest story of the night.